Hello, and welcome to Chapter 3 of the Introduction to Business class. And in Chapter 3, we have the World Marketplace, Business Without Borders. As we go through this third lecture, we're going to be discussing business opportunities in the world economy. We'll look at some key reasons for international trade and some tools for measuring international trade. We'll analyze some strategies for reaching global markets, discuss barriers to international trade and strategies to surmount them or overcome them. And then we'll describe part of the free trade movement and discuss some of the benefits and some of the criticisms. So access to technology is on the rise. At the same time, the barriers to trade are decreasing. All this allows the different economies in the different countries to become independent to a greater extent. This also allows the economies to compete against each other. Different opportunities are also on the rise. Many recent studies have found that if countries increase their cell phone users by 10%, their GDP will increase by 5 to 12%. That's kind of cool. So usually, companies think of expanding into global markets when they realize that there's a new, unexplored, and growing market to be exploited. But there are other benefits too. International trade is advantageous to firms that want to capitalize on factors of production that are not present in the right amount at the right price in a particular country. Global trade helps reduce dependence on one economy, and this reduces the risk for multinational companies. International trade promotes innovation, and it brings in resourceful ideas. Now, as industries become more successful, if they're given the opportunity to operate in a different country, that may give them a competitive advantage. The concept of competitive advantage depends on the understanding of how opportunity costs are related to international trade. When a country produces more of one good, it must produce less of another because resources are ultimately limited. Thus, the value of the product that a country gives up in order to produce its best product is known as its opportunity cost. Although having absolute advantage is beneficial to most countries, it isn't always enough. Now, under competitive advantage, we also have comparative advantage, which is a benefit that a country has in a given industry if it can make products at a lower opportunity cost than other countries. And this is not stagnant. This moves around. For example, during the 50s and 60s, the United States imported many products from Japan. And in recent history, the United States has been purchasing those same products from China. And even that is shifting to leaving China and moving to Indonesia and other developing countries. So these trade deals are not static. So evaluating international trade. Understanding the concepts of balance of trade, balance of payments, and exchange rates will help you measure the success or failure of international trade on individual countries. Balance of trade determines if a country has a trade deficit or a trade surplus, and it takes into consideration the value of goods as well as services. The balance of trade determines the balance of payment, and balance of payment also considers financial flows like foreign borrowing and lending, foreign aid payments, and receipts. Now, it is mandatory to express the exchange rate of a given currency in terms of another currency. So companies indulge in counter trading when the customers don't have the access to hard currency or credit. This situation is far more common in developing countries. If done well, counter trading can be beneficial in gaining customers and products that would otherwise be unavailable. So Director General Pascal Lamy, in opening the WTO seminar on exchange rates and trade on March 27, 2012, said that the international community needs to make headway on the issue of reform of the international monetary system. Unilateral attempts to change or retain the status quo will not work. And I'll see if we can access that. Uh-oh. Now, market develop options. Firms hoping to cash in on international markets can opt to choose foreign suppliers through outsourcing and importing. They can choose foreign customers through exporting, licensing, franchising, and direct investment. Smaller firms usually begin with exporting and progress depending on how business develops. Large firms use many different approaches depending on the kind of foreign market. Most large firms outsource with foreign suppliers and sell their products to foreign markets. So how do we reach global markets? Although foreign outsourcing does reduce costs, the risks involved can be high. Quality control becomes a big issue. Social responsibility issues also arise. Imported products don't carry the name of the importer, and the risks involved are very, very low. Some other strategies include exporting and foreign licensing. So small and mid-sized companies aiming at basic international market development usually choose exporting. Foreign licensing and foreign investment are higher levels of international marketing commitments. The licensor is entitled to a fee that licensee has to pay. This requires minimalistic investment from the licensor's end, and it also helps circumvent government restrictions. We also have foreign franchising. Now, many franchisors offer to guide their franchisees about their management practices, market, etc. An example of this would be McDonald's. Franchisees are expected to pay a startup fee and an ongoing percentage of sales to the franchisor in return. The primary difference between franchising and licensing is that franchisees take on the name of their franchisors. And finally, we have strategies, finally, as we are finishing up strategies for reaching global markets, we have direct investment and joint ventures. So one of the biggest deterrents of direct investment is the fact that it involves huge cost. However, companies who take this approach have more control on their business operations in the new market that they enter. Although joint ventures are popular, they are a controversial means of entering a foreign market. And in some ways that joint ventures work is, through partnerships, which have a long-term agreement, and through strategic alliance, where there's an agreement, but it's not quite as enforceable, and it's a little bit more of a formal, kind of a handshake deal. So barriers to trade. So most of the challenges that international trade faces can be divided into three categories: socio-cultural differences, economic differences, and legal political differences. These challenges are different in different countries. Countries with the most trade barriers usually have the least competition. This proves to be a breakthrough to the first international firms that penetrate these markets. So, social cultural differences. So some differences that can be challenging are things like nonverbal communication, forms of address, attitudes towards punctuality, religious celebrations, customs, business practices, etc. These are all part of socio-cultural differences, and they can, if you're not aware of the norms of the country, they can provide a bit of a social faux pas opportunity where you collectively take your foot and insert it into your mouth because you didn't know. There can be economic differences. So some of the important economic factors that a firm should evaluate include population, per capita income, economic growth, currency exchange rate, and stage of economic development. Some of today's biggest opportunities are in countries with low per capita income. The justice system is something that businesses should consider because the enforcement of ownership and contract rights is overseen by the justice system of that country. Most businesses prefer carrying out their operations in countries that don't support bribery or corruption. And that is because at least by an American value, we like to know what the price of a service is, what is the price of production. And in our country, we don't have to bribe officials to keep the production facilities operating. But in other countries, that's the norm, and it can definitely provide a challenge. Some other problems include the political climate and protectionism. So businesses like to function in countries that have a stable political system. Businesses should also see to it that the intellectual property rights are enforced correctly. Under protectionism, national governments are authorized to set up barriers that regulate international businesses. This is called the practice of protectionism. And usually those practices are aimed at doing only what's best for the home country without working for a bigger global perspective. Now, there are some common trade restrictions. So there are tariffs, which are taxes levied against imports. And governments mostly use tariffs to shield failing industries that would shut down if they were not helped out to support those industries that are important for the domestic economy. So quotas limit the amount of specific products that may be imported from certain countries during a certain time period. And finally, we have the voluntary export restraints, which are limitations on the amount of specific products that one nation will export to another nation. So the VER is imposed by the exporting country. And finally, we have embargoes, which is a complete ban on international trade of a certain item or a total halt in trade with a particular nation. In recent history in the United States, President Obama has lifted the embargo against Cuba. And so now businesses, both in the United States and in Cuba, can begin the negotiation process to find out where there's some opportunity for imports and exports. Now, free trade. Free trade is unrestricted movement of goods and services across international borders. Now, complete free trade is not a reality yet, but regional trading blocs, common markets, and international trade agreements are trying their best to make it a reality. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, commonly known as GATT, was established in 1948 by 23 nations. The Uruguay round of negotiations between 1986 and 1994 is considered to be the most important of changes that the GATT has undergone. We also have in the free trade movement the World Trade Organization. Now, it is a permanent global institution that seeks to promote international trade, and it also settles international trade disputes. So the WTO came into existence because of the Uruguay round. Apart from the functions mentioned on the slide, the WTO also monitors the provisions of the GATT. The ministers of the WTO meet once in 2 years. Now, the World Bank is an international cooperative to reduce poverty in the developing world. It was established after the Second World War, and it now contains 187 member countries. It provides technical and financial advice to the governments of these developing countries. And to explain a little bit more about the World Bank's goals, the World Bank would like to decrease the percentage of people living on less than $1.25 a day to no more than 3% by 2030. And they would one of their other goals is to promote shared prosperity. And the goal is to promote income growth of the bottom 40% of the population in each country. So the poorest 40%, they want to increase their income so that their quality of life is better and the distribution of wealth is more equitable. So if you are interested in checking out this organization, which I would encourage you, please go to www.worldbank.org for more information about this incredible group. Let's see, the International Monetary Fund, it promotes international economic cooperation and stable growth. It has 187 member nations, and the member nations provide funds to the IMF. And the IMF is best known for the help that it provides to the nations who are facing financial problems. At the end of 2005, the IMF implemented a debt relief program for poor countries. And because of this program, the IMF has been able to forgive the loans taken by 39 poor countries, which is an absolutely fabulous thing for countries that are trying to better themselves and better the lives of their members. Now, trade restrictions. Here we have a lot of reasons to have trade restrictions. You want to protect your domestic industries. Maybe you want to reduce prices and increase choices for consumers by encouraging competitions. Under reasons to create a restriction, you want to protect domestic jobs in key industries, protect national security interests, retaliate against countries who have engaged in unfair trade practices, and put pressure on other countries to change their policies and practices. Reasons to eliminate trade restrictions. I already mentioned increasing choice. Possibly another reason would be to increase domestic jobs in industries where your country can have an advantage. You want to increase jobs both at home and abroad from foreign companies. You may want to build exporting opportunities through better relationships. And you may want to use resources more efficiently on a worldwide basis. So trading blocs and common markets. Trading blocs are groups of countries that have reduced or eliminated all tariffs, and they allow for the free flow of goods among the member nations. So the United States, Mexico, and Canada have joined their hands to form the largest trading bloc, the NAFTA. And 27 countries of Europe have come together to form the largest common market, the European Union. So the common market is a group of countries that have eliminated tariffs and harmonized their trading rules to allow for the free flow of goods among its member nations. So NAFTA. The NAFTA came into existence in 1994 under President Clinton and has diligently tried to eliminate trade barriers and investment restrictions between its member nations. However, it is said that pollution and worker abuse have significantly increased because of the NAFTA. The European Union is said to have a combined GDP of approximately 15 trillion. And the EU has successfully removed all trade restrictions among its member countries and also unified the internal trade rules. The members, when importing and exporting from the rest of the world, are subject to standardized policies. The most significant move of the EU was the introduction of the euro. Now, the European Union, so while it has helped Europe's trade position and it has increased its international political and economic power, it has, one of its drawbacks is an economically weaker member countries can drag the EU down into a damaging recession. And there are some countries in Europe right now that are in an economic crisis, and it is definitely influencing that entire bloc. So the EU does affect the global economy, and with a cutting-edge approach to environmental protection, quality production, and human rights, they are really, the EU is a fabulous leader in all of these areas, and probably an area that the members of NAFTA could probably learn from. All right, so as we are closing up this chapter, we have taken a look at business opportunities in the world, economy. We've talked about key reasons for international trade, and we've examined some tools for measuring international trade. We've also analyzed some strategies for reaching global markets and discussed some barriers to international trade and strategies to surmount them or overcome them. We've also looked at some free trade movements through NAFTA and the European Union and identified some key benefits and criticisms. So this concludes the lecture for Chapter 3. There is a Chapter 3 quiz that you need to take, and you also need to look in Buzz for any other assignments. Again, if you have any questions, please contact me right away. I am here to help you. Have a great day.